Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Family Treehouse, a podcast series brought to you by Storied, where I chat with people that have a passion for genealogy, storytelling, or both. I'm your host, Heather Haunert, and today I am excited to get to chat with our guest, Taneya Koonce. While genealogy isn't her day job, she keeps amazingly active. That's my main question for her. How does she get all of this in with her day job? She is in publications and presentations. Last year alone, she had almost 20 presentations that she did in 2023. So Taneya, welcome, and I cannot wait to chat with you today.
Well, thank you for having me on, Heather. I'm excited to chat with you as well and get to talk about storytelling. This is going to be fun.
It's one of my favorite things to chat about. All right, so why don't you start, Taneya, by just telling us a little bit about your background and then how you got started in family history and storytelling.
Yes, I'd be glad to. Oh boy, the infamous question, a little bit about myself. Well, I am a mom to five. I have four stepsons and a daughter, and live in Tampa, Florida now. Have been here for about 3 years, but lived in Nashville, Tennessee for more than 20 years. I'm originally from North Carolina, and I started doing family history around 2005. And I was interested in getting started because I was going through a process of cleaning out some old notes from stories that my grandmothers had told me. And I thought, what information can I find to document what they were telling me? And they both had Alzheimer's by this time. And so I knew I couldn't go back to them. So then I started researching and became obsessed. Very quickly became obsessed. And I'll tell you, one of the most interesting things about having this passion for family history research is that it overlaps with what I do in my day job. In my day job, I have a background in library science. I am a knowledge management information scientist. And in our positions, we are spending all day long in the process of, investigating, researching, finding, synthesizing, sharing, publishing information. And isn't that what we do with family
Yeah.
history? So it's been a nice synergy to be able to combine my professional skill sets for a hobby and passion that I really much enjoy.
I agree. I'm kind of that same way. And it's like my work job bleeds into my, hobbies at home. So
Hmm.
it's such a fun thing. And I think you just, with this kind of research, I don't know about you, but you just get so wrapped up in it and it just
Yes,
hours go by so quickly and it's just a fun thing. So,
that's exactly the case.
yeah. Tell me why you think storytelling, and I want to hear more about your grandmother's stories. Why do you think storytelling is such an important part of family history as opposed to, of course, records are important in newspapers and things like that, but why is storytelling such an important piece?
Oh boy. I was you mentioned all the presentations that I've been doing, and I just recently gave one the day before were recording this, and I talked about the progress and evolution of information and not going from data to information to knowledge. And when it comes to telling stories, I see that as kind of the culmination of that evolutionary process with what we do as researchers. So we seek out data from sources like newspapers, for example. We get data, and then we get multiple sources of data points, and it becomes information because we're starting to understand a little bit more about the picture. And then by the time we finish researching an ancestor, we're familiar with their whole life lived experience, right? We've learned so much about them. And through stories, we can transfer what we have learned and kept up here and make it explicit so that it's easier for those coming behind us to really get to know the people that we're researching. And so that's something that I find appealing, is thinking about how do we undergo this evolution with our data gathering up to the point of telling stories. And telling stories is so important because it makes it relatable as
Yes.
we're learning about our ancestors. It makes it um, poignant in so many ways because many of our ancestors went through so much adversity, but they also had moments of joy. And so then we get to relive that joy every time we are engaged in hearing a story about something positive that happened. It gives us insight into our relatives and our ancestors' personalities. I mean, it's really interesting to see also how characteristics pass on through our genetics, right?
Yes.
I've seen examples of that in my own family history. I'm sure you have, but you see commonalities between who you are as a person and your ancestors. And stories are such an engaging way to communicate that.
I think you kind of said it before, it's relatable and it just kind of makes them real as a person as
Yes.
opposed to just all the data points.
Right.
Yeah. Tell me about your grandmothers. So you said that you had some stories. Were these like audios that you had of them or handwritten things? What did you have for your
So yeah,
grandmothers?
so my grandmothers, I didn't have, okay, so what I had from them was initially just oral stories. Like they would tell me stories, I would hear stories growing up. And at one point in time when I was in college, one of my summers home, I said, okay, I want to talk to them a little bit more and get more detail. So I sat down with both of my grandmothers over that summer and said to each of them, tell me more about your life. And we had, a few hours of conversation, and they gave me all this information and told me all these additional stories. And so I wrote them down. I have been always and still am a copious note taker. I take notes. And so I handwrote my notes from those conversations, and I still have those notes from those conversations. The handwritten notes from those days, I sat down with them. And so as I was taking notes, I was writing down what they were telling me, and then I brought that information back. Now, I was in college, so I was busy. I wasn't really into doing genealogy and family history at that point in time, but I did save the notes. And so when I got back into doing genealogy, when I got into doing genealogy, it was because I had come across those notes again, and I hadn't been keeping the best care of those notes. So they were getting a little bit crumpled, and I had stuffed them in a drawer. And I said, okay, wait a minute, no, let me do their lives justice, right? Let me do their stories some justice. And so I got those notes out, started rereading them, talking to my mother and my father about them, talking to family members. I would make all kind of phone calls. My father said to me, Taneya, I would call him because I spoke to maybe a third cousin. I say, Daddy, I just got off the phone with your third cousin. He's like, I don't even know who my third cousin is. Who are you talking to? So I had a lot of fun connecting with family members around the information that I was discovering to document those stories. So
Right.
it's just been a very rewarding and fulfilling endeavor over these years.
I love that you had the foresight to do that at that age. And I think that's what so many people don't do. They
Yes,
want to tell it or find out at the end of the life or when it's just too late and they don't get
yes.
that opportunity. So kudos to you for having that foresight to do that.
Yeah, I feel fortunate in some ways that I did have this curiosity at that younger age. Even though I didn't start doing the research in college, I started when I was, younger than 30. And that's not an age group that we often see
Right.
in the family history and genealogy community. And I remember I would have conversations with my mother, and she says to me, and she still says to me, she only wishes she was interested when she was that
Yes.
age, because
Yes.
now she's got questions, she's
Yes.
got information, she's heard stories, but really doesn't have anyone to talk to and learn more. The whole generations before her are no longer around.
Right. Right. And the older we get, for me, I just think it's just you remember bits and pieces, but you can't remember everything. So I think it's important, like you said, to write things down. That was
Yes.
great thinking on your part. All right, so tell me when you go to write a story, is there? I'm gonna kind of going out of the box. The question I have
Hmm.
gave you, but
Yeah.
is there a certain length you go for? Is it short? Is it long? Does it really matter to you? What kind of process do you go through
Oh,
to
that's
kind of
a
write your
very good question. Oh boy. So I would say, what is my process? Well, I do. So one thing I do, anytime I remember a story, I have a database that I track the idea in. So
yes,
just in case I can't get the story down at that moment, I say, okay, let me jot this down so I can come back to it later. So I
yeah,
have a whole tracking system. Every time I think of a story that I want to get told, that I want to tell, or that I want to get told, I put it in my tracker.
that's awesome.
So once I feel like I have time to sit down and actually write a story, that process usually involves me reviewing, the information I may have around that story, and just starting to write. Now, more often than not, I dictate
Yeah,
into a note-taking app of sorts, so it's voice to text, and then I correct the text. And I don't consider myself an engaging writer. I can get the facts out, but I wouldn't say I feel I do a good job at telling a compelling story. Now, maybe that's a self-criticism that I just have, but I do at least try to get the story down. Then you asked about length. I like to keep my stories at about a page of text because I am compiling them into like books that I can print out. And so
Sure.
I like to keep my story length about what would fit on the page.
Right.
And then, try to add a compelling couple of pictures or two. And
Right.
okay, plug for story.com. This is one of the things I like about story.com because your interface facilitates that for me, right? We can add a couple of pictures and then we have our text. And you also show kind of how long your text is as you
Yes.
write. And that helps me because I have a mental mindset as to how long I want that story to be. So I try to keep it about a good page. And I also believe that, keeping it short helps keep it a little bit more engaging too, right? But
Absolutely.
I don't feel like I'm gonna bore my family if I'm going 4 or 5 pages of a story.
Yeah.
The goal is to express the highlights, a couple of engaging pictures, and it's a conversation starter, but I am telling the story. So, I go through this process of just jotting it down quickly so I don't forget to come back and tell the
Yes.
story, review what I have, and then just write or get their words out. Then I, spend some time refining it. I've even been known to use some artificial intelligence tools to help.
Yes.
But
Yep.
I, I really enjoy, getting the stories out and sharing them
Yep.
because I just think it's a fun way to shed some light on our ancestors.
Yes. I think you had some great tips there. I think that getting something down, like I am so bad at that. Like literally, if I wake up at 3 in the morning and I've got to jot it on my phone or something because
Hmm.
I don't want to forget it. So I think that was a good tip. And I think too, just the idea of, I think so many people are worried that things have to be like perfect and long and super engaging, but it's not about that. It's just getting that story down. I think
Right.
that's really
Right. It
important.
doesn't have to be perfect. You just
Yeah.
have to, because there's a saying, right? Perfect is the enemy of done or something like that. Like you either get it done or you make it perfect. It's not always easy to do both.
Well, and I want if I'm the writer, I want my voice to come out, or whoever it is it's telling the story. I want to see that and it, mistakes and errors in there because it makes
Hmm.
them more more relatable again as a
Yeah.
person. Tania, can you recommend any resources or tools for somebody that's getting ready to start researching and writing their family stories? You did mention, and this would be a good one to talk about, what do you use your phone when you record you dictate? So kind of talk about what some tools are you use.
Yeah. So when I am dictating, I often start with, so I'm an Android user, and so I often start with Google Keep. I
Okay.
find Google Keep really good for quickly capturing stuff. So I'll open up a note in Google Keep and start talking and let it, capture what I'm saying. And then I take what is transcribed from my voice dictation and put it into my note tracking application. So I use Notion to track my whole entire life. So after I've quickly captured it, I then kind of organize it into my Notion system. And so that's what I use for voice dictation. It's good for me. I really recommend it because sometimes I find the process of trying to type out my story a little laborious. So
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
easy just to talk and get it out, as we were talking
Sure.
about before. So that's kind of how I do the process of capturing the story. Tools for researching and telling your story. So when it comes to research, I'm a big advocate for the FamilySearch.org platform. Given the variety and the scope and the large amount of information that they're providing us as family history enthusiasts at no cost, it makes
Right.
sense to explore as much as possible what we can glean from that site. And so I spend a lot of time researching, looking at those different record sets and getting information. And of course, when it comes to doing genealogy research, there's all kind of resource platforms you can use.
Sure.
And, I volunteer with the US Gym Web Project, and I have definitely found information that's been helpful for my own family on
Yeah.
different county websites as part of the US Gym Web
Yes.
Project. That's actually how I got so invested in wanting to volunteer and give back as much as I do, because I gained so much as a young genealogist researcher from that network of sites. So there's all kind of resources for the research phase. As far as tools for them putting together the story, I mentioned I've used artificial intelligence. I mean, when, as ChatGPT came out and it just caused a whole storm in the world about its potential and its applications, we've increasingly seen many people talk about, well, how can we leverage this for family history research, right? And there's so many ways that you can do that. In my Facebook community, the Academy of Legacy Leaders, back in November, I had a whole conversation with two of my friends and community members about artificial intelligence and genealogy. And it's a lot of fun to say, okay, I've written the first draft of my story or dictated it. Let me put it into a platform like ChatGPT and ask it to maybe synthesize it, to shorten it, and if I've gone on for too long, to figure out ways to make it a little bit more compelling, without going overboard. You have to give these systems a lot of instruction, but you figure that out and you find your sweet spot, and you get into a routine where it's actually giving back something that's really interesting and can be helpful. So yeah. And then as far as how to tell a story, okay, I have a friend and colleague, Dr. Flora Brown. I have learned so much from her for tips for
Great.
Yeah, Flora, for telling stories and all the strategies that she teaches. And one of the things I've been able to take away from my experience learning from her is that you can tell stories in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be the same way or the same strategy all the time. And so I find that fun too. And I challenge myself, how many different conventions can I use as I'm telling a story? For example, starting with the end at first, right? So then you kind of give the big hook and then you explain how you got there, right? I try to challenge myself to use these various storytelling techniques and make it interesting. And I have a very interesting one I can share later in the conversation about how I've actually implemented what I think to be a very compelling way of telling a story.
Yeah, that's great. I think people are afraid to try different things. And I know one of my team members here at Storied did just started with a question as part of his story, just something different. So I did great advice.
Yes.
How do you use, I'm sure you do, but how do you use historical records of different kinds to kind of help tell a story? So maybe you've got a census record. How do you use that to kind of jump to the story?
Oh boy. So, through examining historical records, we're able to glean out all types of facts. And as I'm looking at a record, I think, what makes this record compelling, interesting? Like if I have a census record and I want to show it to a cousin, I don't want to just say, oh, this is a census record. Like, what is it about that record that's insightful? And I try to figure out what's insightful about that record. What am I learning from this record? Um, and so I try to hone in on what's interesting and unique about any particular record. And then, of course, you build up a collection of records and you build up a collection of what's unique and interesting about them. And then you can use that to craft, a story around it. Um, so it's not going to be one size fits all for every record, and every record type is different. Some are more unique than others, right? We're all using census records and we're so accustomed to that. But, I have, oh my goodness, I have, for example, a court transcript. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, passed away when I was 6 months old, and he was involved in a car accident. And unfortunately, he had been drinking and driving and had an accident with a taxi driver. And there was a lawsuit, and I have the court test transcript of the taxi driver talking about the moment the car accident happened and what happened on the scene. And that's an incredibly unique document to have. I literally have in words the moment my grandfather died.
Oh
And
my
so,
gosh, that's just incredible.
it's incredible. And we think about, we all have kind of different unique things that help document the pieces of our story. But when you can hone in on something that unique, it's going to be interesting, no matter who you're telling, no matter who you're sharing it with. So it's finding those gems in our records so that we can share that with our family.
Yeah, and I think that's important to get people to branch out because, like you said, that the census records it's what everybody hones in on. It's what
Right.
they know. It's what's easy, to
Yeah.
access. And and they don't
Correct.
really broaden their horizons to all the different kinds of records that are
Yeah.
out
Yeah, and it takes time to get there. If you're just starting, of course you're going to start with census records.
there.
But the
Absolutely.
joy of getting more and more engaged into this hobby is learning about all these other record types that you can access and oh, what can you find out? So that's part of the joy and part of the journey that we all go through.
Absolutely. I could wholeheartedly agree there. Tania, this is my favorite part. I love this. Can you share a particular memorable experience you've had while researching a family story, or what's a favorite story that you have?
Oh boy. So I have an example to share that actually didn't happen because of my research, but it happened because I shared a story. All right.
I love that. Oh, I can't wait.
So I have a relative. He's a brother of one of my ancestors, and he was a minister at a community in Eastern North Carolina. And I didn't know too much about him except my uncle telling me his memories of him. And my great uncle or grand uncle told me one story about him, and this person's name was Wright Lawhorn. And one thing he told me about Wright is that apparently he'd saved a train from crashing, and so the train company gave him a free pass to ride the train for the rest of his life because of that. And that was just something he told me in a conversation one day. And I
Yeah.
said, "Oh, that's interesting," but I never went and researched it. However, I had researched other parts of Wright's life, and I have a blog, and I share what I'm learning through my blog. So one day I posted a blog story about information I found out on Wright's life. Well, in 2018, I had a county historian contact me. He was the county historian for the county where Wright lived. And he said to me in a very long email, he's like, Taneya, I cannot believe this. He said, I have been the county historian. I've been county historian for over 20 years. And there's a story that I've been researching for these decades that I never made any progress on. And he said, I have the articles, the newspaper articles about Wright Lawhorn saving this passenger train. And the reason I never made progress is because I discovered the newspaper articles was misspelling his last name. And I never, he's like, and one day I was just looking at different variations and came across your blog post talking about him. And I started to look at your tree and realize he's the same person. He said, I would not have made this connection had you not shared the stories that you did share about him. So he gave me the newspaper articles, and it tells an incredible story. So Wright Lawhorn and his wife, they heard this train coming and it was going over this, I guess this bridge that was being, had some construction happening, and it didn't, the bridge had a missing section. So they go out and they flag this train so the train does not go on the missing section and crash. And so there were about 400 passengers on board. And so they were able to stop the train. And so there was no accident because he and his wife were out there had stopped this train. Now, here he is, Black man in rural North Carolina in the 30s or 40s. And so the train company expressed their thanks by at first gave him some money, but the
Mhm.
local newspaper editor wrote a article criticizing the train company for not for saying things like, how much value are those passengers' lives worth? Just a mere $25. And so they criticized the train company. And so then apparently the train company then gives Wright and his wife these passes so they can ride the train for the rest of their life. And they didn't give more compensation, but that story that my great uncle told me was true, and I found out because I shared a different story, and this county historian found it.
That you made me cry, first of all. That is incredible. And I
Yeah.
think that is so powerful in the reason to share those stories. And you mentioned this earlier, and I was going to touch on it and forgot, and this made me think of it, how important it is to tell the story, because how many other things come out of that story
Hey,
when you tell it?
right.
Conversations with other people, in your family, or someone else finding out information. That is amazing. Oh, what a great story. I
Yeah.
love that. That's incredible.
So I
Uh,
found some very interesting things, and they're just highlights to the things that our family members went through, and they just give me so much, encouragement and passion for continuing the work.
yeah. one question I always love, and I think about this, I think it changes over time, but is there like one family member that you like just feel a connection with, that you feel like you would just love to chat with that person?
Boy, who would that be? I'll have to say it had to be my maternal grandmother, right? I grew up knowing her. She passed away in 2011, so I did know her. But because I didn't begin the family history journey until after she had Alzheimer's, I really do wish I could talk with her more, because my grandmother Alice, she first of all knew everybody.
Yeah,
You couldn't go anywhere and Alice didn't have a cousin there, okay?
yeah,
She knew everybody. She was so passionate about the family, about the history of the family, the story. I mean, she had so much information in her, and
yeah,
I wish that, again, I had started to develop this interest before she developed Alzheimer's.
yeah,
So now I get a lot of stories from my mother, but even my mother is like, oh, mommy used to say these things and tell me this and that. And so my mother is fast and furious about telling me every single time she remembers a story, because she
yes,
knows how important it is to get it captured. So I wish I could sit down more with my grandmother and
yeah,
talk to her specifically about the family.
yeah, yeah. As we kind of wrap up here, what would you say are, do you have any last pieces of advice, wisdom, tips, or tricks that you would share and leave with our audience today?
Yes, I would say, if I would say for me, the storytelling process has been intimidating. And, I've been able to do it through my blog over the years because it's short form. I've personally felt I'm not the type of person that could sit down in long form and tell stories or document the family history. So I keep my stories short, as we talked about, in the blog, and that's short for me. And that works for me. So I think, as a tip, we all need to understand what works for us. And if you feel like you're not the type of person like I am who can sit down and write, words and words and words for days, don't
Yeah,
do that. All right. It could be as simple as 3 sentences. Just get it out. As we talked about, get it down. That's the first step. Get it down, get it out. I would say, keep talking with family members. Even as you think of your stories, touch base with others and say, oh, do you remember this? Or how do you remember it? Like, I'll talk to my siblings. We have different nuances in our memories about particular
absolutely.
stories. And so that
Yeah,
helps you get additional perspective beyond your own knowledge or your own memory. So, talk to your family members, and seek out others engaged in the same process, right? I've mentioned my Facebook group earlier. That's exactly what we do, is we share information. And as part of my desire or goals, thoughts or intentions and hopes, that as people hear what others are doing, it's inspiration for them.
yep,
So
yeah,
seek out ways to be in shared communities, and establish those networks. And again, another plug for Storied is, y'all make it social, right? So it's not just you telling a story, it's you're telling a story about someone, but you have a social experience on the site as you do that. And the potential connections that can be made between stories of individuals that may have had a shared experience help supplement your own stories too.
sure.
So, I would just tell people, keep going, get it out your head, document it, get a community where you can engage in this and get inspiration, and continue talking with your family members to find out what those stories are.
Perfect. Great way to end. Well, Tania, thank you for your expertise and your passion that you've shared with me today. I'm honored that I got to spend time with you.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. And, again, this is exactly how we get the message out. We have conversations just like this, and what
Yeah,
you're doing through your platform of talking to different people about their experiences with stories. Again, it's all inspiration that we can all learn from. So thank you.
absolutely. Great. Well, until next time, friends, embrace the power of your family's untold tales and embark on a journey of discovery. Let the ink flow and the words dance as you weave together the threads of your ancestors' lives. Start writing your family stories today and let their voices echo through the generations to come at storied.com. Have a great day. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Family Treehouse, where we celebrate the power of storytelling and preserving our family legacies. Storied is more than just a platform for sharing stories. Dive into those historical records and newspapers, discovering the hidden gems that bring your ancestors to life. Add branches to your family tree, connecting the dots between generations. Thank you for joining us on this storytelling journey. Your stories matter, and through Storied, they have the power to resonate across time and touch the hearts of generations to come. Keep uncovering your family's history and keep the spirit of storytelling alive with Storied.